of Stevens Point Historic Preservation Design Review Commission meeting, recorded April 24th, 2023.
Looks like we got 5 o'clock, so
Okay.
quick do a roll call. Christensen?
Here.
Calnan is excused. McFarland?
Present.
Monk?
Here.
Siebert?
Here.
Malevsky is excused. And Hornig.
Here.
Perfect. We got a quorum. So this is just the time of the year where, since Common Council was reorganized, new members were added to standing committees and these other supplemental committees like historic preservation, where it's time to reselect a chairperson and a vice chairperson for this commission, and likewise other commissions down the road when they meet. So the next order of business will be item number 2, and that would be the selection of a chairperson for the Historic Preservation Design Review Commission. So I'd like to entertain any nominations for those who wish to be chair.
I would nominate our wonderful acting chairman as of right now, Mr. Siebert.
Okay. Any other nominations? All right, just make sure there's nobody else on Zoom. Perfect. Seeing none, all those in favor of nominating Tim Siebert as chairperson of the Historic Preservation Design Review Commission signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed say no.
Thank you.
It is
Thank you.
your meeting.
Okay, the third order of business is selection of a vice chairman for Historic Design Review Commission. I would entertain, any submissions.
Peter?
Oh, okay.
Peter.
Okay. Mr. Monk? Okay. Any other nominations? Okay, seeing none. I would ask anybody, or all those in favor of Mr. Monk being vice chairman, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, unanimous. Thank you. Number 4, report of the February 21st, 2023 meeting of Historic Design Review Commission. I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll move to accept.
A second, please.
I'll second.
Mr. Jordan, thank you. Excuse me. Yeah, Mr. Jordan, thank you. Any comments or questions, changes, whatever? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Excuse me. Number 5, a request from Nicole Terrell, representing Eldon Holdings LLC for a design review to install a principal building on the property located at 1220 Briggs Court, consistent with Chapter 22.02, parens 2. For those that don't know, this is the empty lot just north of that house we looked at a few months ago in the fall.
I'll actually kick it over to the applicant to give a brief overview as to the use and the site improvements, and then I'll chime in afterwards.
Hi,
Floor is yours.
Hello.
my name is Nicole Terrell. I am the co-owner and founder of Nordic Night Sauna. We are a public community sauna and have been looking for a while for a space to launch our business. So that partner has come together as being Farm Shed, and the portion of the lot that is in the northwest corner that is currently vacant and unused. We will be subleasing this lot from them and kind of co-sharing the space with Fields and Flora, which I believe was already brought to the table and approved. So I wanted to start, but before coming here, I wanted to be thoughtful about my understanding of why this committee exists. And so I read through the guidelines before doing the application, and I also I found a TED Talk on sort of the history of historical preservation committees. And so this is just really brief, but the TED Talk was called Historical Preservation, a Radical Conservative Liberal Concept. And one of the statements from the person presenting that stood out to me was that corporate clutter has beaten the character out of so many of our cities. our downtowns are choked with bland boxes that have no souls. And so in sauna, we talk a lot about the soul of the sauna and what classifies something as good sauna. And the primary pillar of that classification is the use of high quality materials. And so that kind of brings us to here. So the sauna was, thoughtfully designed to only include high quality materials and to include a design that would blend itself well into a natural environment. So, on the application, I wrote in there that in reading through the guidelines, I didn't find anything that was used that would have been outside of those guidelines. And so I feel that it fits within what the historical preservation guidelines are intending it to. And I think, do I open it to questions? What happens now?
I'll just chime in real quickly. So this is arguably one of the more unique types of requests that will be brought before this commission with respect to its authority for design reviews. So per consultation with the city attorney, it was determined that the mobile unit would be classified as a structure per the zoning code, per how the zoning code defines the word structure. I know it sounds kind of a little wonkiness from afar, but I guess that's the nature of a 1979 zoning code. But needless to say, all in all, in reviewing the application, reviewing the scope of the project that the applicant laid out, I think it's a lot of thought, a lot of work has been put into making sure that the design of this would be copacetic with that of the surrounding residential uses, as well as just the look and feel, the vibe of what you think a historic property should be here in the city. So ultimately, as stated in the report, my recommendation is to approve. There are two conditions on there. The one being, namely that, should the applicant choose to have this use be relocated back onto the site for subsequent years, that barring there not being any major changes to site improvements, that this design review request, if approved, would run with the use as long as however many years it would exist on the property. So I guess that's all that I have to offer, unless there's any just clarifying questions either for myself or the applicant before we get to nomination in a second.
Anybody? I know that you've actually been pursuing this for a while. We've had some conversations at the council level prior. How do you feel about the relationship that you'll be having? Yeah, I guess one of the things that I'm looking at is how you feel you're going to fit in with the other entities in the area.
Mm-hmm. You mean specifically Farm Shed?
Farm Shed, and yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's come up a couple of times as to why is Farm Shed, which is a nonprofit looking at food security, hosting a community sauna, and how do those missions align? So Maddie, the AmeriCorps volunteer, actually wrote a nice blog on the Farm Shed website of kind of laying that out. And really, I think two things. One, that one of Farm Shed's missions is to support new businesses. And so it aligns because of that. And it also, while entertaining, at the heart of this business and of the sauna is to have it be a unique way to impact public health. And so I think it's more aligned than what it looks like at first blush. And I had another speaking point on that I'm forgetting.
I do
Yeah.
happen to know that the District 1 alderperson is very much a fan of saunas, and probably quite supportive, just thought I'd mention that.
I have to balance when I
That
say
would be-
sauna and sauna,
Yeah.
because I find that if I say sauna, which is how it's pronounced, I get a lot of blank looks.
Oh.
And then I say sauna, and they say, oh.
I maybe missed it somewhere along the way here, but how many people will be in it at any one time? Can it hold?
If you don't know each other, 8. If you're cozy, 10. We've had 11.
Okay.
If you don't want your skin touching anyone else's skin at any time, 8 people.
8, okay. Just trying to get an idea of how big this is, that's.
It does
Yeah,
have
it's
the-
8.5
It
feet
does, but
by
I'm just-
15 feet, yeah. A question that I had is so I understand that this is, a one-time approval, and if it were to leave and come back to this location, that approval would travel with it. Does that also apply to if it were to move to another location also within the Historical Preservation District?
Good question.
I think you have to look at it in local context. So if it was
Yeah.
a change of a location, we'd probably have to reconsider.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that it's problematic, but I think we would
Yeah, I would say that would be similar to, there's verbiage in our design guidelines for the relocation of structures from one property to another, where that technically would require HBDRC approval. So, yeah, I think Mark's spot on. Do I see any issues? Absolutely not. It's just, that would be a thing where it would have to go back before the body.
Sure, okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. I would then entertain a motion to accept the proposal with the staff guidelines.
I would like to move approval of the proposal.
Okay, a second, please.
I'll second.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Mr. Monk. I'm assuming that's with staff guidelines?
As per staff guidelines, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, number 6, discussion on establishing guidelines for the painting of murals on historic properties.
So as you recall, last time we met back in, it's April now, so February, we had our first stab for reviewing a potential ordinance for regulating murals that are painted on buildings within this commission's jurisdiction. So really the verbiage on the slide here is just some background information that I gave last time leading up to why we're having this discussion today. But ultimately, we had a very good conversation last time we met about, what's working well in the ordinance, what's not working well, what should be added. So ultimately, those changes, those comments were reflected in this second draft for this mural ordinance that's included within the agenda packet. So, ultimately, the purpose of this discussion today is to see, first, are there any additional questions that you have pertaining to the draft ordinance? And then secondly, your general comfort level. Are you comfortable with the ordinance as proposed, or are there some reservations that you have? So I'll open the floor up to anybody who would like to start.
Does this apply specifically to just paintings, or could it be a sculpture that's kind of stuck on a building? Kind of
It would be just paintings.
Just, yeah, 'cause it's murals.
Yeah.
just murals, okay.
Whole thing.
One part that that I was just kind of reading over is the H to H, like the proposal shall have cultural, artistic, historical, or societal significance. And I was just wondering if artistic was necessary for that.
Okay, yeah, that's
You mean the word?
the word artistic.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess
I actually see value in it because I can think of some of the present ones that I'm not sure would necessarily be considered historical or societal, cultural, historical, or societal. I mean, I think there are some that are basically for artistic purposes, and so I think it leaves it a little bit broader. I think that's probably why other communities have included that. It just allows us a little more flexibility.
And I think a good example would be, let's just say our first district alderperson is a world-renowned artist. World-renowned artist. That's a tongue twister. And
There's a reason why you're stumbling over it. Just for the record.
and he's worldly known. He has events that he goes to in Paris and London, let's just say. And he comes to Stevens Point.
I don't make it to Plover.
That's Paris, Michigan, incidentally.
And he comes to Stevens Point and says, hey, I want to paint a mural on X building. I think using the word artistic there in a way would fit there, since if you're a world-renowned artist, that there's a tie significance to the artist itself who's painting the mural versus that of the cultural, historical, societal that's talking more so about the depiction, the meaning behind the mural itself.
Okay, all right.
And this would all apply to those concrete flower pots or garbage bins or whatever those are?
No, that's a whole
nother
separate thing. That
Okay.
was something that went before this body in spring of, it was, I think, like a month or two before I started here in 2020.
Okay, but that's
Yeah.
separate then?
That's
Okay.
separate, yep.
Okay.
Because these are more permanent, where those garbage can ones, that's an annual
Get
change,
repainted,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
My only comment would be, I think you've done a good job of incorporating a lot of our prior discussion.
Yep, I agree.
Made a very usable, comprehensive document, so well done.
Any other comments, suggestions?
How does an applicant get to this point in the approval process? They first go through city council?
So they would fill out a design review application, basically the same application that Nicole submitted.
Okay.
And then I would review it per the guidelines in whatever the final ordinance will be. If I'm generally comfortable with it, kick it before this body for approval. If there's deviations that's being proposed, then essentially it would be reviewed subject to the appeals process. So this would be subsection 4. And if I believe that the requested deviation does not deviate from those 3 variance standards, for lack of a better term, then ultimately that would be my recommendation to approve when that request goes before this body.
So when we had Create Portage County in here before, that was approved prior to coming in front of us, correct?
So it was
their level, yes.
Yeah, it was approved for their level, and that's something that when the time comes that a final mural ordinance is adopted, my hope is that I've been having conversations with Maggie already about whenever future mural requests are being brought before their body, that there's at least some commission representation, if it's myself, if it's somebody on the commission who has kind of a initial review of it, just to make sure that there's no wide disparities in what's being proposed in the mural versus that of what's in the ordinance. Because
Okay.
I don't want it to be where Create approves of it, but there's major problems with how our ordinance is drafted, which would require them to have to go back before Create for
Yeah.
reapproval.
Okay,
So
good. Good, thank you.
What's the next step for this then?
this step would be post a public hearing, like basically same process as what we did for
Okay.
the ordinance preventing demolition by neglect. So
Okay.
if the general consensus here is that you're comfortable with it, then I'll reach out to you all sometime this week so I can get a meeting date lined up for our next commission meeting where this public hearing will be held, and then we'll go from here. I think just based off of the noticing requirements, we wouldn't be talking until another roughly 4 weeks from now, from when the next meeting where this would take action. So, but I guess generally, is there comfort level? Are you okay with it?
So.
You think, no, we want to go back, kick it back to staff for more revisions, or?
As a world-renowned artist, I'm comfortable with it.
There, you should take pride in that.
That answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess if you're all okay with it, then like I said, I'll reach out to you later this week about scheduling or, so, appreciate it.
Okay, number 7. Adam, discussion on the downtown walk audit held on April 20th.
Yeah, so, first off, I appreciate those who were able to attend the walk audit that we had of the downtown area this past Thursday. I don't know about you all, but, I've learned a lot just having it's one of those situations where, you drive past the downtown almost every day, but you don't come to realize all what's working well and not working so well until you actually look at it, observe it at a 6-foot level and see really what's working and what's not working well. So, I have a couple of observations that I had that I wrote down that I have in the next slide. But first, I just want to get kind of your general thoughts. Jordan, Mark, Peter, I don't know if there's none online. I guess initial thoughts as to what you took out of the walk audit on Thursday, and then obviously for Tim and Eric, just your observations by walking, driving, biking through the downtown almost on a daily basis. Just initial thoughts.
Go ahead.
My initial thought, and I walk there quite often, and I live very close. And so every time we go down, and each time there are details that I haven't noticed previously. I think I'm really excited about some of the people having some of the care that's been taken to preserve some of those buildings down there and their character and the extra time and effort that's been taken to do that. Also, there are some buildings that need some TLC, and so I think the community was well served by also seeing if we can provide some kind of support to help that happen, not to do it, but to be supportive in those efforts too. So I think it's kind of one of those many situations where I'm kind of happy we're at where we're at, but we're not satisfied to stay there. I think there's still improvements that need to be made, so.
Appreciate it.
Jordan?
Yeah, I would agree to that. One thing I've been wrestling with is the use of wood as a material around windows. It's very noticeable that as opposed to aluminum or steel wrapping is in disrepair much quicker than the other materials. So I'm not saying we need to address that for front facades like Jadeco and those buildings, because they do look good, but across the street from there, the Scuba Shop, which is almost right on the square, is looking pretty rough. So, and again, I don't walk those streets all that much, but when you can touch it and look at it, it looks like I don't really know quite what to do moving forward to replace such materials or encourage the use of, again, the aluminum, the black across the street. I understand that there needs to be symmetry and synergy between the neighboring buildings if they have those same materials. So it's just good to see that in person, that again, those materials do differ from block to block, and that some of them certainly need some more maintenance than others.
some of those facades just basically had a wood facade put over the existing, and you don't know, I'm just curious what's behind it
Yeah.
and what it would take to restore that. And I've seen, some of the conferences we've gone to, I've seen examples of some of those that look very similar to those that have and all of a sudden they take them off, and what's behind it is unbelievable. Now, if I had X-ray vision, that would be helpful, but I don't. But you do wonder, and maybe some of those are just too far gone, but, maybe there's some really good things that could happen too.
But maybe that's something to take note of if someone were to apply for one of these grants to do a facade repair. We potentially, might recess and explore if there is an option to.
And we do have a facade grant program to help offset that cost.
But that's what I'm saying. That'd be the perfect use of that.
Yes, absolutely.
As opposed to just putting up new wood and then revisiting in 10 years.
I think like Buffy's Lampoon down by the square is like a prime example of, that there's masonry behind there. So, but that wood's been there just as far as I know. I mean, who knows what's back there? I mean, be curious to see. But any other thoughts, Peter, Tim, Eric? Just anecdotal evidence.
It's one thing I'm looking forward to is we were talking about what the window issue with like opening up those artificially filled in windows, and like how what that could lead to in terms of like downtown people developing that and that sort of thing.
There are communities that have developed programs to encourage the development of second-story spaces into living spaces. A lot of them have housing shortages, and that's a really good way to address that.
And that's something that I've been kind of like looking at too. I think the term that I just reminded was creative reuse or something like that.
Yeah.
Was I think that's what some of the other commissions that I saw in that presentation of using that as kind of a way to address issues of housing.
And as you get additional people living there, those are built-in customers as well. I mean, there's a very synergistic effect there as well. But it's not inexpensive to renovate those areas, and so it's got to also be able to cash flow for the property owner.
Yeah.
I think it was perfectly timed, especially with potentially some more commercial spaces coming available along the river. How do we want that to look down the road? I know we don't focus a whole lot on the rear of buildings, but if the Green Circle Trail is heavily used, we certainly want whatever goes there to be very good looking on all four sides.
And I think that's actually included in the targeted master plan for downtown, the consideration, because the rear of those buildings are now becoming secondary fronts.
Yeah.
And so with entries, and so you want it to be attractive from both directions. So that is definitely a focus.
Okay, Tim or Eric, if you had anything.
I was also going to comment on the filled windows. They really stick out, and everything could look a lot better if some of those were reopened. So I think it's a good program to pursue.
Okay. Some of the mouse is kind of shoddy today. So some of the, I guess, observations that I had, awnings, we had a pretty good conversation about triangular versus semicircular. I know, last time when we had the conversation with where Following Outfitters is now, when that design review request came before this commission, I mean, I think Tim and Eric, you probably were the only folks on the commission then that are still on now. So just having a conversation about that. And this is something that Barry mentioned on Thursday, which I thought was it'll be a good conversation starter, is, should there be a differentiation in the allowed types of awnings for your main entrance doors versus that of your storefront windows or your secondary front doors. Whiting Place was a very good example where the main entrance for Whiting Place off of Strong, it has more of a kind of long semicircular arch over
Traditional.
that. Yeah, versus basically traditional that you see for many hotels. Should there be a differentiation between that? Exterior wall materials that Jordan, you mentioned. Paint, I know that's going to be probably that's something I hear a lot from members of the public that I'm sure when we have the conversation in the months ahead, we'll talk more about that. Massing scale and orientation of the buildings, as what some of you said, preserving the visibility of the Wisconsin River for future riverfront development, and then regulating the height differential of adjacent buildings for new construction. So if there's there's a vacant lot along Main Street, and building to the left is 2 stories, building to the right is maybe 1.5 stories, let's just say. Having guidelines, more thorough guidelines as to really what's the max differential that's allowed, both increasing in height and decreasing in height when you're looking at buildings kind of down the line. Ordinance language, we talked about this a lot. Should versus must, may versus shall. A lot of our ordinance language says that you should, to the greatest extent possible, do X, Y, and Z. Should, it's good to have a historic preservation ordinance, design guidelines like this, but if you use words such as should and may, it's very open-ended, right? It leaves an applicant to technically do a work that would be approved by this commission that might not necessarily meet the purpose and intent of why we have design guidelines. Review criteria for major work. This is something that Mark, you mentioned about kind of like in a way like an appeals process, what guidelines should be in place for this commission to look at in the event somebody is wanting to do an improvement that is contrary to a specific standard within our design guidelines.
And my feeling, and I prefer must and shall, but with an out, where if there's a unique set of circumstances where for some reason it won't work, it doesn't prevent the whole entire project. They have the ability to present their case to this group or to the council or to both, and so it could still move forward, because once in a while something comes up, and whether it's not cost feasible, there's a requirement, for example, when we did a water and sewer project up north, the line goes by a property, they have to hook up. And the one property was built, and the brownstone was about 2 feet under the surface. And so they would have had to bring in a huge grinding thing from Iowa or something, and the cost was going to be about as much as what the house was worth. It was like, so they asked, and yeah, obviously they were able to receive a variance on that. But, I do prefer to not give too much flexibility up front, but if you're going to be mandating things, then you also do need to have somewhat of an appeal process, so they could, if there's circumstances that make it out of the ordinary, they have a chance to share that.
And then lastly, the cleaning of masonry surfaces, language that we have currently pertaining to power washing, sandblasting. Honestly, how our language is, how our ordinance is written currently, it's very difficult for somebody to clean the exterior surface of their building. And I think you see it in some buildings, especially along Main Street. There's some buildings that, like Mark mentioned earlier, need some TLC, and in which just cleaning the surface of the building would do wonders. But finding ways to give folks options as to how they can clean it while making sure it's not going to harm the architectural integrity of.
And the structural integrity. I mean,
Structural integrity,
when you
yeah.
sandblast the outside of a brick, it looks really good for,
5 or 6 minutes, and
yeah,
then,
and then
Yep.
for a year, and then a year later, it's falling apart. But
Yeah.
yep.
No, but I thought that was, I don't know about you all, but I thought, like I said, there's a lot of takeaways that I had from this last walk audit that I'm interested, looking forward to our next conversations. So as far as timeline, I guess before I get to that, any other last minute conversations, last minute discussions that you had pertaining to Thursday? Okay, then I
Well,
guess.
I just want to mention, I never want to do another walk audit again.
No? Come on.
Did you guys get rained on? You guys got rained on, I think. I think I left, it was.
At least not this week.
No, well, it sprinkled maybe for like a minute, but it kind of seemed like the real dark clouds kind of ventured over to our west, that once I saw those dark clouds, I'm like, oh man, we're gonna get drenched. But thankfully it didn't happen. But I guess as far as next steps are concerned, so as I mentioned earlier, we do have the walk audit for the Clark Street Historic District, which will be this coming Thursday. So unfortunately, Alder Christensen, we will have another walk audit. So
Start at Emerson, right?
yes, we're going to start at Emerson, and
Full disclosure, I may be gone, actually. Not by intent, but yes.
not by.
And it's not
intent.
because it's the first night of the NFL draft. That has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Just want that noted, too.
You're excited about that new first round pick, right? That we got? But, okay, so Tim is right. We're going to be meeting over at Emerson Park, and essentially what we're going to be doing is the route's going to be going east along Clark Street to the far eastern extent of the Clark Street Historic District, so
Wait, where
Fremont.
is it going again? Sorry.
So we're going to meet up at Emerson Park.
Yes.
We're going to go Clark Street down to Fremont. Then we're going to go hook up back onto Main and go
Okay.
westward. Now, this is the area that's outside of this commission's purview. Main Street's not part of, these homes along Main Street are not part of the Clark Street Historic District, but it is part of the Clark Street, Main Street Historic District that's listed on the state and national register. So it's one of those situations where there's relevancy, and should this commission years, decades down the road want to expand the Clark Street Historic District, then at least there's, the conversation, there's some relevancy there.
Just for the record, there's one block of Clark Street that's not
Correct.
historical district.
Yeah, so then we're gonna hook up basically Main Street, Center Point, kind of go over basically North Side Yard Development, and then hook back up to where we didn't, where we kind of left off last time, going through the post office, going through basically this chunk of Main Street from the post office eastward towards Division, and then hook back up to Emerson. So there's that, and then next time that'll really be the last walk audit that we'll do. This event on Thursday will be primarily for existing residential development. So really that'll culminate to really the months ahead. How I envision us having the conversation will be really going through each of these sections one by one. So, there might be one meeting where we tackle the exterior walls and materials sections, and we're gonna go basically requirement by requirement, really the fun, exciting stuff. I mean, this is the fun stuff that I learned with zoning code rewrites back when I worked for Grafton, that it might sound very arduous, very mundane, but honestly,
And
you
it
learn.
is.
It is. Not wrong there, but you learn a lot. So that'll be something that next time we meet is when we're going to kick off going over some of these sections, and that's really going to be the meat of what we're going to be doing for the months ahead.
How many pages in total?
For this document,
Yeah.
57.
That's
Some
not so
of-
bad.
Which was a really good year. Yes. I mentioned that, too.
Some of these
A
are,
birth year, perhaps?
some of these are relevant, but.
As of last week, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's basically just kind of next steps forward. So yeah, looking forward to the conversation. And unless you have anything else for this item, I think I'm all good.
Okay. So item 8, discussion on Historic Preservation Fund subgrants. I assume that has to do with the windows?
Nope.
No.
So this is a whole new thing altogether. So this is kind of segueing, a good segue from our last conversation about the design guidelines. So how I envision kind of next steps forward with the design guidelines. That's, we start in May. We're probably going to be having monthly conversations about this lasting through, I'd say at least the fall at the earliest. But leading to this agenda item, this is really going to talk about, what's our next big thing that we want to tackle as a group, if we want to tackle anything.
Can we change and get the map updated now that Wisconsin Rapids is a CLG?
Unfortunately, SHPO does not have an updated map. So we'll have to talk to Jason about that. But needless to say, every year, so before I get to this, so as you all hopefully are aware, the city is identified as a certified local government, which is essentially a government jurisdiction that meets specific criteria pertaining to surveying, administration, regulatory matters for historic properties. And one of the really neat things about being a certified local government is that each year through the budget adoption process on the federal level, there's money that's appropriated to the Department of Interior, which is then in turn appropriated to each individual state historic preservation offices. And these state historic preservation offices are essentially the caretakers of these funds and can distribute funds to certified local governments so long as these certified local governments meet specific criteria that I'll talk about in a little bit. Just bare bones information about asking about what you can ask for as part of a historic preservation fund. So minimum amount would be $1,500 up to $25,000 with the ability to ask for $50,000. And I will say with the caveat that any asking amount between 25 and 50K has to be this big, grand, once in a lifetime type of request. So you see a lot of communities generally don't ask over $25,000 just since the burden of proof is so high. Yeah. So going into really the eligible projects as part of applying for a Historic Preservation Fund subgrant. So there's A through K, you see different eligible projects, and they're each basically ranked based off of the number of points that you get. So section A here, which it is listed, these eligible projects are listed in the agenda packet somewhere here, starting on 36, yep. So essentially, if you do projects higher up, A, B, C, those are generally viewed more favorably for project reviewer as part of the State Historic Preservation Office. And then when you go down the line, like hosting a camp training workshop, that's generally viewed as a least priority type of project. So generally, what do these A through K eligible projects narrow down to is really these four things. One being the surveying of historic properties and archaeological sites. 2, the nomination of historic properties and districts to the State and National Register of Historic Places. 3, educational programs related to historic properties and local history. And then the fourth one being the development of design guidelines and historic preservation plans. The reason I'm bringing this before you all is in large part just based off of the timing. This, as I mentioned earlier, this is a yearly application that is presented to communities who are identified as a certified local government. And really now is the time of the year where if a community is interested in applying for funds this application cycle in 2023, now is generally the time to start having a conversation as to, are you interested in applying this year? And if so, kind of what's the general project type that's of interest? And, one thing I'll note before kind of kicking it back to the group for initial conversations is timeline on this is pretty long in terms of timeline shown on page 32 of 41 of the packet, that the application itself is not due until December. We wouldn't find out our results until early 2024 should we choose to submit an application this year. And depending on the type of project that's being proposed, if funds are awarded, you're talking a couple of years. Case in point, historic preservation plan. Case in point, a nomination to the state and national register, as Tim, Eric knows from the work that this commission did for putting the Clark Street, Main Street Historic District on the state and national register. This commission, along with our finance committee and council, approved the application for CLG funds back in 2017 to apply for it. We did end up getting the funds, but we did not hear from the state and national register as to our nomination status for this Clark Street Historic District until, I believe, 2021, I'd say. So it's
somewhere in there.
It's a long drawn out process. So longer than what I'd prefer it to be, but unfortunately there's a lot of parties involved. So included in the agenda packet, in my memorandum to you all, I kind of gave some initial comments as to these 4 main project types, and I guess my general thoughts as to where the city could potentially see some benefits. So first of which, surveys. As you know, this would be page 28 if you're following. So first off, surveys, you all know 2011 we did hire an outside consultant to have an intensive survey of properties here in the city. Generally speaking, 11 years, while it's relatively outdated, it's not outdated enough in the minds of SHPO to necessitate the need for a new survey. I know they mention later in the application itself, generally 25 years is the ballpark. So, specific for surveys, I don't necessarily think it would be as lucrative of a project application if there is any interest in going that route. Nominations, as I mentioned earlier, we did do the Clark Street, Main Street Historic District a couple years back. This is generally, as you can see in the packet, this type of project is generally viewed more favorably. And what I will say is this type of project would be just for the state and national register. This would not be for listing properties under local historic district review. So essentially, as I mentioned, this is a type of project that would be specific nominations that would be more of a drawn out process. It would take a couple of years to find out our results, but thankfully, since we've gone through that process a few years back, there's a general understanding about A, the process, B, how much it would cost for an outside consultant to submit an application. For example, the Pine Street, Plover Street Historic District, that's one of the districts that's been recommended by our Common Council at the time to submit nomination papers to. The rough cost back in 2017 to do the work for nominating that district was about $6,000. Naturally, now in 2023, 24, and beyond, it's going to be a little bit more, but I don't think that's significant of a difference. Going further, third one, educational programming. We've talked at length about the need for this commission to hone in on more educational programming for members of the public, property owners itself. There's potentially a route to go down to ask for funding for that type of project. And then lastly, number 4, design guidelines and historic preservation plans. We're doing the work for design guidelines right now. The one thing I will note that it's, unless any of you are very keen on Chapter 22 of our revised municipal code, we do outline in our code of ordinance the desire to adopt a historic preservation plan. Essentially, this would be a historic preservation plan for each individual historic district here in the city. This would essentially be kind of like a comprehensive planning document specific for that region. And there's criteria in Chapter 22 as to what would need to be included in a hypothetical historic preservation plan. But I'll finish talking. I think I've talked long enough. So ultimately, last thing I'll mention is at least one perk that I see with a grant application, should we choose to submit an application at some point in the future, if it's this year, next year, down the road, is that there is no local match requirement, which in the context of grant applications, that's few and far between. Usually there's some skin in the game that a community has to fork over. So having SHPO by way of the feds pay for the entirety of a potential application is wonderful in my eyes. So with that said, I'll open up the floor. I guess just initial thoughts as to, is there an interest about looking at this grant further, either this year or for future years, depending on timing? Is there an interest in pursuing this grant program? And if so, if there is an interest, then we can talk about a specific project that may be in mind. A lot of details here, so.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that I and Jay both get the 20 bonus points because we do have a current survey in place. So that does make them much more likely to actually get funded. The little detail in the box, the bonus.
Yeah.
And so if we did want to do a historic preservation plan, I agree with you. We're going to revise our design guidelines, but I don't think that would probably be enough to qualify for anything. I do think the creation of historic preservation plans would be something that would probably get funded, and that has some potential.
Which one? I'm sorry?
The historic preservation plans
Oh, yeah, okay.
for each of the historical districts.
One thing I'll just do as a sidebar about the bonus section for items, projects I and J. This would be page 37 of the packet. The one chunk of language in that bonus section that kind of took me off guard was it would be the 4th line where it says, and made reasonable efforts to nominate all properties and districts evaluated. And that's kind of that's the caveat, because if you all are familiar, I'll actually pull up the map.
Yeah.
Since I'll be
I thought of that too.
super helpful. I think I just stopped sharing. That's not good. Sorry, Maria. So as you know, we have the Main Street, Clark Street Historic District, and then basically all the chunk downtown. Additional proposed historic districts that met the criteria as part of our intensive survey, but is just not a local historic district or listed on the state and national register, would be, these chunk of homes just southeast of the courthouse, the Plover Street, Pine Street area that I mentioned earlier. You have the few properties along Ridge Road, Ridge Court, which to this day, I'm still kind of curious as to why it meets the standard of being a historic district. But this is, I guess, where I'm
Isn't
kind
that,
of
well, I'm just trying to think what's all there.
It's a lot of,
Mid-century modern? type?
Mid-century modern.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's
Yep.
what I'm thinking.
yep.
So that's kind of the caveat that I saw with that bonus part is that, you know, if we submitted nomination papers and all these other districts were listed on the state national register, then I would say absolutely, I think we would apply for this bonus section. The fact that we haven't applied for nominations for the chunk of properties by the courthouse, for the Pine Street, Plover Street area,
Could be problematic.
could be problematic, yeah. And I think,
I'm a little frustrated in that it seems to be so prescriptive. I mean,
Yeah.
that we'll approve it, but it has to be for this, you know, even for educational purposes. I saw the heading first, and I thought, boy, maybe we could use that to help supplement efforts to create a walking tour and all our
that was my thought.
historical preservation.
Yeah.
But then when you read it, it's like, no, they want you to teach people about the importance of historic districts and how to, I mean,
Yeah.
so, I mean, a lot of this grant comes across as almost self-serving for the organization. They want you to either nominate more things for them or educate people of how important they are. I don't know, it's a little frustrating.
that's fair.
You've got to have something to show people that there is one there before you can do what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I'll say kind of from the outside looking in at this grant program, I think the two types of projects that really sticks out for me would be the historic preservation plans that, Mark, you mentioned. It's written in Chapter 22 as something that we need, that we should be
Yeah.
doing, and ever since, you know, the 80s or so, whatever year that this commission was formed, we haven't done that.
Right.
And I'll say that that's something that,
I think that's our best shot. I think it's probably would give us the most bang for the buck, but it's whether that caveat is big enough that
Yeah.
it'll disqualify us from consideration. But I agree with you. When you take a look at everything in its entirety, I think that would be the one most worth pursuing.
and I will say, I think between that or even like the nomination, I think specifically thinking, we had a good conversation during the ordinance preventing demolition by neglect about financial resources, that, you know, there's a lot of financial resources offered to downtown properties. We have our facade improvement grant, and just naturally a non-residential type of land use, there's a lot of financial resources available locally, statewide level, et cetera. That at least one benefit of a nomination would be the tax credit opportunity for property owners, that, you know,
That's
there
true.
wouldn't be, you know, this commission would not have purview over, you know, what type of siding would be put on. Say if it's the Pine Street, Plover Street area, this commission wouldn't have purview over it since it's not a local historic district. But if somebody, say, wants to put new siding on their house, and as long as they meet certain criteria outlined through the Secretary of Interior's office, that they would be eligible for tax credits, which is a big carrot on the stick for individual property owners. So, and I guess ultimately, if we would have interest in pursuing this grant down the road, those would probably be the two areas that I would lean, the historic preservation plans and the nomination. I guess any thoughts specifically for those two types of projects? Is there kind of initial thoughts as to, you know, one type of project may outweigh, maybe more favorable in your eyes than the other, or?
I would be leaning towards a historic preservation plan, but, you know, give that one a shot first. And if it gets denied, then can I always come back?
Okay, anybody?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good
else?
idea. Good
Preservation.
sequence.
Yeah, and otherwise, I mean, I can talk with Jason, our rep from the State Historic Preservation Office, that if we,
He's on a first-name basis with him, too.
Yeah, you noticed that.
yes, that,
Jason.
that if
Mr.
we.
Tish?
Mr. Tish. See, you know him. That.
Not its first name, though.
Oh.
It's Jason.
But yeah, I'll reach out to him and see, if we would be, if he thinks that we would still be
Yeah.
eligible for the bonus points, then I guess we can look down that path. If not, then I'd say, I guess, is there a consensus then about the nomination route, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And just depending on what his answer would be, if he says no, you're likely would not be eligible for bonus points, that he would steer us towards the direction of nominations. Is there a particular district in mind? And this is something that I don't want to put you on the spot, but I kind of
I would be
need to
looking
know.
I would be looking forward to your recommendation at next month's meeting.
So the reason I would want kind of a hunch as to preferred area is it's listed in the timeline. One of the requirements that a community would have to do if they're interested in submitting an application for nomination is that we have to have basically a public engagement meeting with these impacted property owners. And that would be something that if, after conversations with our SHPO rep, he says, if you're interested in applying for an application, you're best served to do the nomination route. We'd have to schedule that sooner rather than later. And that's kind of where having a specific area in mind as preferential would be at least helpful on my end.
My thought is the most threatened of these is the first one,
First one,
Church of the Intercession, because they've already torn down part of St. Steve's stuff with the convent they tore down,
Yeah, and that was,
which was,
see if I have it somewhere. I might have lost it. So I remember when we got quotes back in 2017 about the cost for submitting nomination papers for any of these 4 or 5 districts. The St. Stephen area was generally viewed as the least favorable of the 5 of being nominated, just in large part because of demolition of the
convent?
Yeah, however many years ago that was now, that building in and of itself being demolished harms the likelihood that would ever be nominated.
I would agree with Tim. The Church of the Intercession is.
yeah, there's 3 buildings there that I think are being threatened. The hall in the back, the church building itself, and then, of course, the residence.
Rectory, whatever it was,
yeah.
Parsonage or whatever.
I don't see the St. Steve's Church is going to be threatened, but nonetheless, the congregation is way down.
But that was just renovated, and they just did a huge amount.
Color is that on the map?
It would be
like
what
pea
color is
green?
that? On Ellis Street, that kind of
Oh, okay, yeah,
pale
okay.
green kind of
Right,
thing.
okay.
Yep.
And I don't know that the Church of Intercession is being used for anything. I don't see anybody going in or out of there.
Yeah, so I'm just reading back from 2017. So staff, along with the Wisconsin Historical Society, reviewed the district above, so these 5 districts that are mentioned in the packet, and confirmed that the Church of the Intercession, St. Stephen's RC Church Historic District, has lost integrity due to the convent demolition and would weaken a application. They did mention the reason why they ultimately went before. The reason why they chose the Clark Street district over that of the other 4 was namely the amount of properties that were included. There were 125 properties within this green shaded area versus really the other 4 in question. I don't have a problem having the conversation with Jason to see if sentiments may have changed,
Yeah.
or if that's still, or if that's still kind of the sentiment that you're not prohibited from applying for it, but the odds of you getting it would be weakened given the common demolition.
Well, just so that intersection and its 3 buildings is so unique.
Yeah.
And they are threatened
Yeah.
by neglect. I don't know, I'd pursue that, see what he says.
Okay. Otherwise,
I don't know, anybody else have any thoughts?
yeah. Otherwise, what I can do is I can try to have schedule maybe a Zoom meeting with Jason, maybe if Tim, Mark,
Sure.
if both of you wanted to partake as well, just to kind of hear your thoughts, both on this and the historic preservation plan component, at least to kind of get some direction. Thankfully, there's time is on our side. If we still wanted to submit an application this year yet, doesn't say that we have to. This could be a project for 2024, but at least we have options at our disposal.
And you need something to do anyway.
That's true. I just sit at my desk
Jeez.
and twiddle my thumbs all day.
Crying out loud.
He's a rock star. I've told him that before. He knows that.
And you're a world-renowned
Artist.
One out of the 2 statements is true. We'll put it to it.
Okay, so I think I got some good direction on my part. Is there any comments?
Anything
points
else?
I think we just really have a need to adjourn.
Thanks.
Okay, we are adjourned.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.